Hey guys, thanks for coming back. Join us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Glad to have you back. So today we're gonna ask and try to answer the question: the rich pay their fair share of taxes? It's a refrain we hear a lot. From my perspective, all sorts of bells and whistles and alarms start going off because there's a lot of undefined, nebulous terms in the question. I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer them, but I think before you can answer a question like that, any rational person would ask to try to define some of those terms. So let's jump into that. Those, like I say, the first thing that comes to mind with that question is more questions. What's rich? Do the rich pay their fair share of taxes? Who's rich? Who decides who's rich? What does rich mean? And what do people consider fair? What's a fair share? I've heard politicians say they think the top tax rate should be 70, 80, 90%. Uh, that doesn't seem very fair to me. If I told you every dollar you make, you had to give 70 cents of it to the government, how hard would you work? How much would you do? That seems ridiculous to me. But some people think that's fair. There again, nebulous term. Before you can really respond to a question like that, I think you have to be able to define what exactly those terms mean. What is rich and what is fair? And we're not going to do that in today's video because I don't have the answers, but I will share quite a bit of data that shows what goes on now, because I don't think most people understand the breakout of who pays what in taxes and who pays what percentage of the total income taxes paid in the United States. So we're going to cover some of that today. We've also, as always, we're going to put our links anywhere we did research so you can go back and verify any of this information. You should not take my word for it. I'm not going to lie to you, but you should be able to prove that I'm not going to lie to you. That's always a good way to go, and it's always concerning to me when people don't cite their work, provide their sources, or give credit where credit is due. So we always try to do that. Anytime we don't do that, it's a mistake on our part, and we gladly fix it if it gets pointed out to us. So very important. How much do people of different income levels pay now? Like what does someone that makes 50 grand a year pay versus someone that makes 250 grand a year? We'll talk about some of that. And should our tax system be a flat tax or a progressive tax? We're not going to talk about that in this video, but I personally am a proponent of a flat tax. When you look at the amount of tax revenue collected by the government since 1913, when the 16th Amendment was passed and the income tax was officially instituted in the United States, roughly on average 17% of GDP is what the tax revenue winds up being. Why not just tax it at 17% and get rid of all the deductions, rid of all the loopholes, gets rid of all the special interests? It makes politicians much less beholden to special interest groups because it's just straight up. You made this much money, you pay 17% of it in taxes. Very straightforward. My own opinion, but let's dive into some of the current state now, and you can make an informed decision or have a more informed conversation the next time you talk about it. So, data we're looking at right now is in 2021. This data came from, I pulled it directly from the Tax Foundation, which is a nonpartisan 501c3 that wants tax policy that promotes economic growth. That's to me exactly what a government should do. Governments don't create a single job. Governments don't provide a single job. They confiscate wealth from the private sector and use it to, in theory, provide services to the public. And I say in theory because I think there's a lot of places where we just have government programs that shouldn't exist anymore, right? Provide for the common defense is in the Constitution, so we should have some type of military or way to defend our country. I think we talked about it in one of our episodes. There's really only needs to be 3 laws. The government should keep people safe. It should enforce contracts between 2 private parties, and it should provide defense for the nation. So keeping people safe to me is, someone shouldn't be able to break into your house and damage your property, take your property, hurt your property, or you, and then just, protect the country itself from foreign adversaries. So my take, for what it's worth, I think I'm right, or I wouldn't be saying it. I'd be love to hear your take if you think differently, or if you agree with me, that's fine too. I think it's better to talk to people you don't agree with because you learn more when you do that. But that's my own opinion. So 2021, as reported by the IRS, the Department of Treasury, there were 153.6 million individual tax returns filed. they reported more than 14.7 trillion in adjusted gross income. So that's actual income. That's money paid to people for stuff. And we'll talk more about some of those delineations as we go through here. And of that, there was nearly 2.2 trillion in individual income taxes collected. So that works out to an average rate of about 14.9%. So 14.7 trillion, 2.2 trillion collected in taxes. That works out to about a 14.9% individual tax rate. Now, how's that broken out by income distribution, i.e., people that make more? Do they pay a higher percentage of their wage in tax, or is it the same across the spectrum? Well, the answer is yes. People that make more absolutely pay more in tax. And we're talking averages. You can always find someone that has structured their income in a way because they know the tax code really well, which again, if you have a flat tax, it gets rid of stuff like this. But if you structure things in a way that they're not considered income, or maybe they're considered capital gains, or maybe you have a really solid asset and you can borrow against that asset and you don't have to sell or bring revenue or income, bring income off of that asset. That loan is absolutely tax free, but you've got access to the money. And if you can get a loan for 8% and your tax rate is 25%, what would you do? I'd get the loan, right? So there's lots of, I shouldn't say lots, but there are situations where high net worth individuals do those kind of things. It's foolish not to do those kind of things. Why wouldn't you do those kind of things? You hold on to the asset, it continues to appreciate in value and build your wealth. You pay the 8% on the money. It's way better than paying the tax. So, like, that's your tax. You reduce your tax rate from 25% to 8%. Flat tax gets rid of those kind of things. Again, just my opinion. With that said, the top 1% of taxpayers paid a rate of 25.9%. So pretty substantial, especially when you look at it and compare it to the bottom half. So the bottom 50%, the average tax rate for the bottom 50% of income earners in the United States was 3.3%. So when you hear people complain about taxes, their effective tax rate on the federal level is 3.3% if you're in the bottom half of income earners in the United States. If you're in the top 1%, you pay a 25.9%. That's 8 times higher. The rate is 8 times higher on the top 1% than it is on the bottom 50%. So you hear a lot of talk about the top 1% getting all of the growth in the economy. Top 1%'s income share rose from 22.2% in 2020 to 26.3% in 2021. So it went up from 22.2% of the total income reported to 26.3% of the total income reported. And the share of the federal income tax that group pays, the top 1%, of all of the taxes that the federal government collects, the top 1% in 2020 paid 42.3% of all of the federal income tax. In 2021, when their share rose, that increased to 45.8%. So in 2021, of the total, the 2.2 trillion that was collected by the government, 45.8% of that was paid by the top 1%. So if you say the top 1% is rich, which I think by all standards that would be rich, they already pay almost half of the income tax that's paid in the United States. The top 1%, 45.8%. Now, let's go down a level and just cut it in half and say, okay, forget it. Let's just say the top 50% versus the bottom 50%. The top 50% of all taxpayers paid 97.7% of all federal individual income taxes. So pay their fair share. They're already paying almost 100%. That means the bottom 50%, just do some quick math, paid 2.3% of the total income tax in 2022. So there's a couple of call outs on the next bullet point. That 2021 figure includes pandemic-related tax items from the ARPA Act, which was the American Rescue Plan Act, non-refundable part of the third round of recovery rebates, the expanded child tax credit, and the earned income tax credit. There was also a big uh, surge in capital gains realization that what exceeded 2 trillion, and that's a 40-year high in terms of capital gains taken. And this was, remember, this was after the tax cuts that were passed by the Trump administration that have been decried by hundreds or thousands or millions of folks as unfair, as tax cuts for the rich. Well, the rich are paying all the taxes. So it's hard to cut someone's taxes when they're not paying taxes. And when you look at the bottom 50% paying 2.3% of the total taxes, where's the tax cut going to go? It's going to go to the 97.7% of the taxes that are being paid, which is the top 50% of the earners. So you should always ask questions when you hear people making statements like that. Well, there's no tax relief for the lower class. Well, why is that? Because they're already only paying 2.3%. So I know that's probably not popular here, but it's the truth. Those are just the numbers reported by the U.S. Treasury. So the individual income tax rate went up from 2020 it was 13.6%. It went up to 14.9%. So there was an increase at the rate of tax that people paid. And the total income taxes paid also went up 485 billion to 2.2 trillion that we talked about. And another thing to consider here, the Office of Management and Budget does not include the refundable part of tax credits as spending. So if you get a tax credit, it gets sent to you as a refund. That gets classified as spending, so it doesn't get included in the tax figures. So what that means is it's only lower income folks that qualify for those, because you basically earn your way out of eligibility for those credits. So if you get a refund, you're actually getting your tax money back. So that 2.3% does not include the refunds that came as part of the tax credits, like the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, those kind of things. That 2.3% has not backed that out. So that 2.3% is actually overstated. It's higher. It's that number is higher than actually what is paid by the bottom 50%. So I don't know. The rich should pay their fair share of taxes. You tell me. You tell me if paying 97.7% of all of the income taxes at the federal level is fair or not. So the bottom half of taxpayers, what are we talking about there when we say the bottom half of taxpayers? In 2021, you had to be under $46,637 to qualify to be considered part of the bottom 50%. And your average income tax rate, if you're in that group, if you made less than $46,637, was 3.3%. So as you make more money, the rate at which that money is taxed goes up. So if you were between the 10th and the 5th percentiles, the 10th percentile starts at $169,800 in adjusted gross income. And the 5th percent, it goes all the way up to the 5th percent, which ends at $252,840,000. Your average income rate is 14.3%. So that's 4 times higher. The rate is 4 times higher if you're between the 10th and the 5th percentile than it is if you're in the bottom 50%. So you tell me, is 4 times the higher rate fair or not? Seems pretty fair to me. But, that's just my opinion. In 2021, taxpayers with higher incomes paid a much higher average income tax rate than taxpayers with lower incomes. That's just a statement of fact. When you're in the 10th percentile or higher, and you're paying between 4 and 8 times a higher rate than the bottom 50%, it's hard to listen to the argument that that taxes are being unfairly pushed onto the middle class. It just doesn't the data doesn't back it up. So the top 1% of taxpayers, so to qualify for the top 1% in the United States, you needed to make at least $682,577 in income. Your tax rate, the average tax rate in that group was 25.9%, almost 8 times higher. So, yeah, like the rich should pay their fair share. Okay, again, what's rich and what's fair? You tell me, because it feels right now like people that make more money are already paying a lot more in taxes, both on a rate basis and an actual dollar basis, than the bottom 50% of wage earners. And I don't know if that's wrong. I don't know if it's bad. I don't think it is. But I would also argue that there is revenue left on the table because of all of the carve outs and special interest groups and shelters and deductions that are available to the rich. And if we just did a flat tax and made everybody pay 17%, I think we would see a huge growth in the amount of revenue collected by the federal government. And I also think we'd see a huge growth in the economy because it would basically tell entrepreneurs and businesses, you know exactly what you're going to pay in tax now. Write it down. You're going to pay it and go run your business and make more money. Put up new factories, hire more people, push out more products, innovate, grow, um, compete. If we did that and they knew exactly what their tax rate was going to be, I think we'd see a tremendous amount of growth. Um, but yeah, so the other thing too is the top 1%. They earned 26.3% of all of the income. So if you're in that top 1%, if you're in that 682,000, sorry, give me the number here, 682,577 or above, if you are in that, you earned 26.3% of all the income and you paid 45.8% of all the income taxes. So it's hard to see how the rich aren't paying their fair share. Contrast that with the bottom half, the bottom 50% of taxpayers earned 10.4% of the total income, and they paid 2.3% of the federal income taxes. And recall, that's overstated because the stuff that gets refunded as a credit is still in the tax number, even though folks get it back on their return. So that 2.3 number is actually higher than it in reality what they actually paid. So the bottom 50% earned 10.4% of the total income and paid 2.3% or lower of the total income taxes. The top 1% earned 26.3% of all of the income and paid 45.8% of all of the income taxes. So it does not feel accurate to say that the rich are not paying their fair share. Are there situations or, again, shelters or deductions or carve outs that have been negotiated and or paid for by special interest groups and lobbyists? Sure there are. Sure there are. But if we simplified the tax code and we went to a flat tax, a lot of that would go away, in my opinion. But in all, the top 1% of taxpayers accounted for more income taxes paid than the bottom 90% combined. So that's just the top 1% is paying more than the bottom 90% in income taxes. They paid more than $1 trillion in income taxes. The top 1% paid more than $1 trillion with a T in income taxes. Well, the bottom 90% paid 531 billion. So half. The bottom 90% paid half in dollars of what the top 1% paid in dollars. So super interesting, I found. So that was 2021. That was the most current information I could find. Again, we've included the links so you can look this information up. There's lots of really good charts with the Tax Foundation that showed income distribution, taxation by income distribution, the changes in percentages over time of both income distribution and taxes. I can tell you after doing a little more research on this, the wealth inequality and the rich need to pay their fair share taxes ring very hollow with me. The numbers do not support that the rich are dodging taxes or getting away with not paying taxes. Don't disagree that we should look at some of the shelters and special interest things that are going on. But when you look at the total tax revenue generated by the United States, it's being paid by rich people. It just is. So if you found that interesting, feel free to send this on to someone who agrees with you, disagrees with you. I think it's good we have all the facts. I just always am a proponent of dealing with challenges, issues, conversations from a fact-based position, not an emotional position. It feels good to say the rich should pay their fair share. Okay, what's rich, what's fair, and what's actually going on right now. I think the facts are very important when you have conversations like that. So look, guys, don't forget to go check out our website, saltygingertalk.com. We've got links to all our social on there. All of our podcast episodes are on there. Don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our channel on whatever platform you find our content on. We appreciate you coming back and seeing us, and we'll see you next time. Everybody have a good week.